hearing the news of former President Jimmy Carter passing away at the age of 100.
Yeah.
A well-lived life.
A well-lived life, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we should all be so lucky, right? I mean, he, a life of service. Yeah, he's a man of enormous decency, and that showed through. I think as president and in his post-presidency, but it's a loss for the country. It's a loss for the world. It's also a personal loss for those of us who work for him and spend time with him. So.
And
But not unanticipated, right? I mean,
but he held on.
he held on. Matter of fact, I used to joke somewhat irreverently that I thought Carter's ambition was to outlive all of us who work for him. He outlived a lot of them. So.
Mm-hmm. And the amount of impact that he's had even after his presidency is remarkable.
Remarkable. Yeah, truly remarkable. But also his presidency. I mean, there'll be, there's already been the beginning of a reappraisal, as always happens with the president. And it fortunately started before he passed away. I mean, Stu Eisenstadt, a colleague in the White House, wrote an exhaustive book on the Carter presidency from an insider perspective. Kai Bird wrote a wonderful book. Jonathan Alter wrote a wonderful book. Biographies and histories of the Carter presidency that tell the fuller story than had been told. But I think with his passing and the analysis and whatnot, there will be a further reappraisal. I mean, just natural. And when he passed away, and I was thinking and talking to, we've had a zillion texts and emails back and forth, phone calls with former colleagues and friends. Carter's major accomplishments are well known. The Middle East Peace Accord, Camp David, Panama Canal treaties, which the president-elect says he's going to undo, national energy policy for the first time, economic deregulation of airlines, cargo and passenger air travel, trucking, rail, all of it to spur competition, which has helped grow the economy and stuff like that. These are all major accomplishments. Not all of them well known, well understood. For example, the craft beer industry, that came about because of a Carter deregulation of the beer industry. All the ethics laws, the inspectors general, that's a Carter initiative. Doubled the size of our national park system with the Alaska Lands Bill. After the 80 election, he did that in his so-called lame duck. Superfund, that came after the election. So, a legislative scorecard that's as good as anybody's. And then you take his post-presidency and all the work he did, disease eradication in Africa and monitoring elections and democratic development. I mean, a lot of people would have been satisfied with being president, but he kept going.
If there's one or two achievements that you think were his best, kind of what would those be?
Well, if you look at actions or specific policies, it's hard to rank them. But certainly the Middle East Peace Accords, Camp David Accord, between Israel and Egypt, even though it remains a troubled part of the world, no question about it, that peace treaty between the two of those countries, and then later Jordan joined, has lasted all these years. Israel and Egypt have not been in conflict since. So that's a big one. The Panama Canal Treaty is a big deal. Had those treaties, which actually started in the Eisenhower administration, the discussions started with Eisenhower and continued through Kennedy and Johnson, Nixon and Ford, and every president up to Carter realized that the Panama Canal was a hot spot in Latin America. You know, the way we took the land, the way we built the canal, all of its incredible historic achievement, but it came at a price. And the price was virulent anti-Americanism throughout the region. And every president knew that could spark a Vietnam-type guerrilla war in Central and South America. It was that real. And so getting rid of that sore spot was really important. And so Carter came into office and began immediately figuring out how to get you need a 2/3 vote in the Senate to ratify a treaty. And the idea of treaties at the time probably had the support of 15% of the public. I mean, it was very unpopular. But he worked at it doggedly, and the staff did, and you know, getting one vote at a time, and we finally passed them with 68 votes. We needed 67, so that's a major achievement. And then you look at the legislative scorecard. I mean, all the energy stuff, and it's really hard to pick one. But I guess the Camp David Accords has to be sort of at the top of the list,
especially with what is happening now.
Especially in light of what's happening now. Yeah, imagine what's happening today if there weren't a treaty between Israel and Egypt and Jordan. Jordan came in later, but I mean the place is near explosion already. But without that foundation, that accord, it could be a whole lot worse. And Carter, you know, in those discussions and later his work, I think I have to be careful how I say this. I think Carter believed that Begin and the Israelis went back on their word as it related to the West Bank settlements, and that has been, as you know, a major area of friction ever since, you know, those West Bank settlements stand in the way of a viable two-state solution. And I think Carter probably, I don't know this, I never talked to him about it, but I'm guessing he was unhappy about that.
Yeah. And having worked in his administration, kind of, what did you take away from, you know, working closely with him that you still use in your life?
Well, I guess, first of all, let me go back, and this may not make the air, but life is, you can't predict things are going to happen, right? Just can't. And I met Carter. I was working for a member of Congress from California, Norm Mineta, who'd been elected in 1974. And one day, Jimmy Carter comes walking in the office in July of '75, just to say hello to Norm and to congratulate him on being the head of the freshman Democratic House. Norm wasn't in the office. So it fell to me to have a conversation. I knew who he was. I knew he was running for president and all that. And he said to me, he said, look, he said, I can't stay now, but he said, we're going to have a fundraiser tonight over near National Airport. It'll cost you only $25. He said, I'm going to give a talk, answer a few questions, and then you and I can have a conversation afterwards. I thought, well, that's pretty nice, right? So that's what I did. And I became an early Carter supporter. I thought the guy was incredible when I first heard him speak, that he was hitting all the themes that we knew the American public was looking for. Honesty and decency, and especially in the wake of Watergate and so forth. You know, had I not met him, who knows what I might have done or ended up, right? I mean, no way knowing. But that then led to, I did work in his campaign in the Pennsylvania primary, and then I was his whip of the California delegation at the convention, and then I ran the field operation in California and the general. All this is '76, never thinking that I was going to go in the White House. That was never, I didn't have a plan. I mean, that just wasn't it. I thought I'd go back to work for Mineta and spend a couple more terms in Washington and probably move home, back to San Jose. Yeah, it didn't work out that way. I ended up working in the White House. And first in the Congressional Liaison Office, Congressional Relations, I kept track of all the initiatives and working to make sure that the Congressional Relations piece and the policy piece were working together and so on. And then a short time as Deputy Chief of Staff and then to the re-election campaign. Those were, I mean, I've had a wonderful career and wonderful life, doing lots of different things, but those are high points, right? And the lessons that I took away from those, large part because of Carter, is one, you don't have to cut corners. You can be, you know, I mean, it hurt him in times, but he was straightforward and honest. Don't shy away from the tough fights, take them on. Always strive to do better. Those are all hallmarks of his style, and I think influenced all of us, or most of us who work for him. He's a hell of a decent guy. Just a really, it wasn't, you know, the West Wing, the Jeb Bartlett and the staff and the president shooting the bull in the old. That didn't happen, and at least didn't happen with me. I mean, it was all business, right? But it was very rewarding and nothing I could have ever anticipated. I mean.
Hey, Garfield?
Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
How would you characterize your relationship with him?
Say again?
How would you characterize your relationship
My relationship with
Jimmy
Carter? I would say that well, first of all, there was a ring of senior staff. They're called assistants to the president. That was like 7 or 8 people. I was in what would be the next ring. I was a deputy assistant to the president. So as a campaign worker, and then in the White House, and then the re-election campaign where I had different responsibilities, my relationship with him was primarily official, okay? There's one anecdote that I've told, though, that I think is worth a retelling. I was named Deputy Chief of Staff in early June of 1979, mid-June, somewhere in there. And I was going through the beginnings of what turned out to be sort of a rancorous divorce, right? Not a good combination. Become Deputy White House Chief of Staff and going through divorce at the same time. But I did, and I was in a meeting with the president and a couple of colleagues in the Oval Office, and the meeting ended, and I got up to go to the next meeting, so I was standing at the door to the hallway from the Oval Office, and the president came around and he poked me in the chest. He said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing fine, Mr. President." And I thought it was a general inquiry, you know, one person to another. And then he said, "How are you really doing?" And I said, I'm fine, sir." He said, "How are the kids doing?" Now, mind you, I had never told the president what I was going through, right? I had told a few colleagues, but somehow he learned about it. And here's this guy with a lot on his mind, a lot on his platter, and he not only takes the time to ask me, he cared enough to ask me. Later on, when I would see him at various Carter Center events and would do programs and what, it was much easier, much more casual conversation than when working for him as a staff guy.
He's very personable.
Yeah. It's personal. We've all talked. He did, as a candidate, he was without peer. He was so effective one-on-one and in small groups. I mean, or even in the White House, we bring down we'd bring groups of members of Congress down for the president to make his pitch on whatever the issue was, you know. And he was just brilliant. But it didn't always translate to mass audiences, to television, right? He certainly wasn't as good at it as Reagan turned out to be, or even Obama turned out to be. But as a one-on-one campaigner, he was, and not just campaigner, as they say, advocating his program with members of Congress. He turned them around. When they were against us, he'd make his pitch and turn them around. He was just, and people trusted him, you know. Even the ones who didn't like him trusted him, or believed him.
Believe this word.
Yeah. So, I don't know, does that answer your question, Kerr?
Yes, it does,
Did
thank
you
you.
have another one, Kurt?
No, you said probably his greatest accomplishment. I personally, I just think of him as one of the best working man's president that was ever, you know, in office. How would you characterize that?
Well, you know, central to Carter's success as a candidate and his performance as president was that he came from a real life experience. Here's a guy who was born in southwestern rural Georgia before they had running water, before they had electricity, right? And now his father was relatively well-to-do in the sense of being a small town farmer and owned a warehouse, but they weren't wealthy. And his mother was a nurse, or a what do you call it? When they help women give birth. Hey, she was a nurse, but she was also
A midwife.
a midwife who delivered Rosalind, actually. So they were, you know, small town, and if you've ever been to Plains, and you think that somebody grew up in this small, rural, remote, and at the time when he was born, poor part of the country, and worked his way to the presidency of the United States. Pretty phenomenal. But he never lost sight of his roots. And that's why when we were defeated in 1980, or as I say, when the American people retired us from office in 1980, Carter went back to Plains. He went back to where his roots were and became, you know, determined that he was 56, 57 when he left the presidency. I'm sure he had no idea he was going to live to 100, but he had several years ahead of him. And rather than go out and make a lot of money on corporate boards or doing it, which he could have done, he decided to set up the Carter Center to work on disease eradication, democratic development, transparency in elections, all that. He did volunteer work for Habitat for Humanity. He wrote 20 some odd books. Traveled the world as an elder statesman, always working on causes, but I think going back to what his roots were. He always was what he appeared to be, right? So he was authentic and no airs, you know, no airs at all. It's a remarkable American story.
And to see the outpouring of support and love,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
From his passing. Everyone's talking about it as we take a look at the TV. Kind of, how do you sum into words? Does it sort of reinforce everything that you've believed?
Yeah, it does. The outpouring of love and respect and admiration. As you said at the beginning, a life well lived, right? And that's what you're seeing. You know, people appreciating but it's a life of service and honoring public service and bringing decency to the craft of politics and government, which seems to have been lost in recent years or is in much shorter supply than it was. You know, as you might expect, there's been a flurry of emails and texts and phone calls among those of us who work for him. And it's all the same. First of all, we appreciate the opportunity that he gave us to work for him in the country, okay? And to do the things we did and to work on the things we did and where we did. And I mean, I never had a day where I went into the White House. My office was in the West Wing. I would park my car on West Executive Avenue. I'd walk into the West Wing, and I never lost the thrill of, you know, going to work there. It was magical. And we all felt that way. And we had a tremendous sense of loyalty to the president, which one would expect and hope for. But we also had loyalty to one another. Very little backbiting in our staff and intramural turf stuff. I mean, a little bit, but nothing ever made the news. And we remain close today. The survivors, you know, we stay in touch. And that's really a tribute to him.
And when was the last time you were able to meet?
The last time I was with Carter was, I would say, it must have been 5 years ago. It was after we moved here from D.C., and there was a Carter Center event. They pulled together their major donors, of which I'm not one, but several hundred people, and they do an annual retreat with a program, right? And I and two of my colleagues, we were centrally involved in the creation of the Department of Education, making it a cabinet department. It had not been, and that was actually a big fight and a big win. Anyhow, we did a panel discussion on the creation of the Department of Education, given the background stories and stuff that Carter said afterwards, stories he'd never heard himself. But it was at a wonderful lodge up on the Columbia River Gorge. And so there were times where we could just sit and chat. And that was the last time I got a chance to really spend time with him. I did get a really nice note from him just before he went into hospice. It was on my 80th birthday, and I got a nice personal letter from him. And that's really the last communication I got from him, which was 2 years ago.
Kurt, did you have another question?
No, I think I'm good.
Anything else you want to add that you think is important that people know as the world mourns Mr. President's death?
What's the most important thing to remember?
Yeah. Well, anything else we haven't talked about that you want to add about?
Well, I would just reinforce. It seems strange to say this in the context of what we've been through the last several years, okay? What Carter represents is that decency. First of all, the guy was the smartest guy I ever met, just brain power, right? But that's not as important as the character issues. Enormous decency, absolutely honest. Sometimes honest to a fault in the sense of being willing to say things that were not popular. So one would hope that with his passing, people will reflect on the qualities of decency and service and courage, commitment, determination, all of which he had in great supply. He could get testy if you know, I was never in a situation where he got angry with me. I remember a couple of instances where I was in a meeting where I had to tell him something he didn't want to hear, right? And that's never easy with the President of the United States, you know. But he looked at me, you know, sort of a stern look, and then nodded. He got the message. But I wouldn't have wanted him mad at me, but it never happened.